I'm Ruth Mandel, director of the Eagleton Institute of Politics. For those of you I don't know, I see a few familiar faces, people I do know. It's great to have you here. I want to begin by thanking Professor Melissa Aronchek, sitting over here, for welcoming many of you, friends of the Eagleton Institute of Politics, here this afternoon to join the students in her course. So the course, there's a course here that's my course on a woman for president, ? And there is Professor Baranchek's course called Media and Politics. And then in addition, there are a few of you hangers-on who watch TV. There's no doubt, in terms of the course on media and politics, that our speaker today is an expert on that subject. As the Eagleton Institute celebrates its 60th anniversary this year, some of you who are our friends know this and have heard it, we've adopted a theme that we're proud of. It's called Make It Better. And we view that theme as a call to action for the Institute itself and for the larger community to better understand how our political system in the United States works, how it changes, and certainly how it can work better. And the news in recent months suggested that there's a little room for making it better, for improvements. So we hope we can be part of that discussion. Today's speaker is a triple, I'm going to say not triple threat, she's a triple treat. She's a communications expert, she's a novelist. As an Old English major, I'm always thrilled to have a novelist in the room. And she is a political analyst on television. She served as communications chief for President George W. Bush's White House and re-election campaign. She was credited with, and I'm quoting here from a description of her, with injecting a tremendous amount of realism into White House deliberations. You can ask her about that if you like. According to the Washington Post, she served as, quote, a voice for more openness with reporters. Nicolle Wallace also served as senior advisor for a few of you in the room might know this, for the McCain-Palin campaign in 2008, often traveling with Sarah Palin on the campaign trail. She appeared frequently on network and cable news. During that campaign, she was a top spokesperson and defender. And some of you, no doubt, have seen the HBO documentary drama Game Change, so you might get a little view of what her life was like. Since leaving the world of government and campaigning, she has been co-host of ABC's The View, and she's now a political analyst for MSNBC. And I was really hoping that this morning they'd cut her a break and she'd come out to New Brunswick, but she was on this morning from 6 to 9, so she didn't have a whole lot of sleep last night, but you can't tell. She is bringing the GOP perspective, maybe she'll disagree with that description, and the latest from her conservative dad, he is often mentioned on Morning Joe, to the Morning Joe set, sometimes in the evening, these days chatting with Rachel Maddow. She's also part of the team that has been analyzing primary outcomes, most recently on Mega Tuesday, where she was covering the primaries. And it's always, for me, and I bet for a lot of you in the room, a pleasure to watch her, no matter how tough and confounding the politics, she's always lively, lucid, and in good spirits. She's smart. She's always smart, and while she's serious, she doesn't really take herself too seriously. And it's a pleasure and enlightening to watch her and listen to her. Nicolle has visited the Eagleton Institute a few times, the first time when she was in recovery from the 2008 campaign. And she had just published the first of her 3 best-selling novels. And for those of you who don't know about those, I do want to mention, one is called 18 Acres. The next one is called It's Classified, and the third one is called Madam President. And they tell the story of the first fictional woman president of the United States. Now, especially as we're considering the possibility of a real live first woman president, it's such a great pleasure to welcome her back to our podium, this time to talk about today's unprecedented presidential, you've got her book, someone's holding them up, unprecedented presidential primary season and the chaos within her party. Her title for today is Election 2016, the media, the messages, and the madness. Nicolle.
Wow. That is the nicest thing anyone has said about me in a very long time, and erased all the self-loathing I had from looking at my Twitter feed this morning. I'm here because I love you and I love coming here, but I'm also here because the guy standing in the back, who is my partner in almost every political experience that was just detailed, the Bush, that's Mike Duhame, who was one of the, I don't know, does this help you or hurt you in this room? One of the geniuses behind George W. Bush's re-election in 2004, one of the soldiers in the trenches in 2008 on the McCain-Palin experience. That sounds like a 3D movie, right? And the single most trusted advisor to your governor, and a faculty member here. So that's why I'm here. You know, I like to keep this short because I find that in this wild year we're having, the questions you have end up taking us on a better journey than any plan I could have. But I will tell you where I think we are. And I gave 2 speeches last week, and they called me on Sunday and said, what are you going to talk about? And I said, it depends where we are. You know, it'll be Wednesday morning after 2 more primaries, and we have to see what happens. So here's where I think we are. Every week, we talk about all the things that Donald Trump does to offend us, our souls, our spirits, our minds. If you're a woman, a lot of other things. And then every Tuesday night, he goes and wins a couple more states. If you're a Democrat, people are a little more politically correct about it, but they talk about this titanic matchup between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and then every Tuesday night, she racks up a bigger lead in the delegate count. So I think we are staring at a Clinton-Trump smackdown next November, and it will be just that, quite literally. And I think instead of spending my time bemoaning how this happened, I think it's important to sort of acknowledge my party's responsibility in this outcome. I am a card-carrying member of the Republican establishment. It's taken on a new and more powerful meaning. It actually means people who govern under the banner of Republicans, governors, senators, House members, mayors. There aren't very many of them. And it also, I think, in modern times, came to encompass people like me and Mike who work for governors, senators, House members, and people who want to be governors, senators. You get the picture. This sort of, for lack of a better term, ruling class did some things that strained, and my old boss, George W. Bush, did some things that sort of strained his relationship with the grassroots. He, after 9/11, I think did the best job he could, but he took the country to 2 wars that became very unpopular, and the ruling class didn't seem to suffer the consequences. It was the people who fought the wars. So that started to drift. George W. Bush also believed in a federal role in education. He passed No Child Left Behind. That furthered the drift. The grassroots of the Republican Party didn't see a federal role in education. Then he thought that Medicare needed a prescription drug benefit. There was something called the donut, where people were paying an inordinate amount of money for their drugs. Adding a new entitlement is typically very unpopular with the Republican base. So at the end of the Bush presidency, when he had to do, when he felt that he had to do a bailout in the face of an economic and financial collapse, there was almost a complete break between the Republican establishment and the base of our party. The campaigns and the candidacies of John McCain and Mitt Romney didn't do anything to heal that, not really directly through the fault of either man, but probably based on the fact that they ran on very typical Republican ideas, fueled and generated by the ideas of a Republican establishment, not by the unemployed or financially insecure member of our party, not by the family stretched and strained by multiple deployments in the now very unpopular wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So we sort of broke faith with our own base, and I subscribe to Peggy Noonan's analysis that you can go out and find a new establishment of any party, but you can't find a new base. You know, they don't get paid. They don't get anything out of it. So we broke faith with the base of our party, and they came roaring back this cycle by not only embracing Donald Trump from the very beginning of his announcement of his run for the presidency, but voting for him in large enough numbers so that now he is leading in delegates. I think it's an insurmountable lead. And I think you will hear a disproportionate amount of time spent on a conversation about a brokered convention. I think it's possible, but not likely. And I think that that there will be sort of this not ideological, but intensely personal campaign waged on both sides in the fall for the White House. I think the fight against Trump is about his temperament. Someone said, why don't they run negative ads against Trump? And when they do, why don't they work? Because Trump is a walking negative ad against himself. I think against Hillary Clinton, the attacks will be about her character. Someone like Trump really can't go after her for her record or her experience because he doesn't have either. So it'll be about her character and her husband's character. And I think we are really in for something we haven't seen, certainly in my lifetime, a brutal general election. I think, now that I'm in the media, I like to share some self-loathing, not just for my political party, but for my new profession. There's this claim that we fueled Trump's rise. I don't buy that. But I think Trump has now said enough things that silence is its own statement. So I think you're going to see people in the media increasingly under pressure to opine. And I think that creates a tension in and of itself because a network has to book interviews with each party's frontrunner. But if you're on TV talking about politics, staying quiet is a comment in and of itself. And by staying quiet, I mean when Ted Cruz suggests policing Muslim neighborhoods, if you nod your head and say, that's an approach, these ideas are too radical to say nothing. So I think you're going to see the media play an outsized role, and I think you'll see sort of the opinion media very comfortable in doing so. But I think you'll see the rest of the media in an uncomfortable position of having to ask questions that may lead to boycotts by certain politicians. But I think this is a time where everyone is sort of going to have to lay it all out, put it all on the table. I feel pressure every morning to sort of honor my parents are Trump supporters, so I see through their eyes why they arrived at that. I hear the racial undertones and the gender bias and want to react to that, but I hear from them their utter disgust with the corruption that sort of took over the Republican establishment, the way politicians are. So I get it on both sides, on and off television, and even this morning at the end of the show, I said to everyone off camera, we're going to be here every day from 5 a.m. to 9. We've got to be a little nicer to each other. I mean, everyone feels this intensity about this cycle, and it's dividing families, it's dividing anchor teams, it's dividing networks, and I think the only way through it is to sort of talk about it all the time. And I know. I work for the Today Show also. I work for the 2 morning shows. I don't know how that happened. I'm not a morning person. But I somehow work for 2 network morning shows. So when I walk to do the Today Show, sometimes people will grab me on my way in and say, Trump's just saying, what we think but we can't say. And then I'll arrive on the set and people say, isn't he a racist? And I'm like, my head's spinning and it's not. So, people are experiencing this campaign on very different levels. People are arriving at their candidates with very different motivations. Something I've said over and over again, and I believe this to be true, and not just because I know Trump supporters, is I think most people that are voting for Trump like him despite the abhorrent things he says, not because of them. I think that, yeah, I know that people always debate that. If someone groaned, I've heard the disagreements from Rachel Maddow every time I say it. I think that the question now becomes for Republicans who are part of this, hashtag Never Trump movement. So you're voting for Hillary? And I asked Lindsey Graham that this morning. So if the choice is Hillary, he said, I'll never vote for Hillary. But I said, the likely choice, this is part of the Republican fantasy that brought us to this point. The likely options are curtain number 1, Hillary Clinton, curtain number 2, Donald Trump. So, I think what's coming next, my 4-year-old always says, what happens next? What happens next is I've made the assumption that Trump likely gets the most delegates. I may be proven wrong. Mike might even disagree with me. But if we don't end up in a broker convention, or even if we do, I think that Trump is in a strong position either way. And I think the choice is between someone that Republicans, as recently as 6 weeks ago, was suggesting might be indicted, or someone that a lot of people in my party just find supremely unqualified to be the leader of the free world. So that's the grim view from the Republican side. On the Democratic side, I think it's amazing that that people still see Sanders as so viable. I mean, he's in it, and it's possible. But because of the Democratic system, which, believe me, if the Republicans had superdelegates, they'd all be in witness protection by now. But, because of the Democrats' process, it is an insurmountable lead that she has. So if I have any dismay, it does not equal my dismay about what's happening in my party, and I'm not making an equal argument here. But there is some perplexing undertone to the Democratic race in that she is so far ahead. I think if she were someone about whom a lot of Democrats and a lot of progressives didn't have reservations, I'm not sure we'd be talking about how Sanders pulls off an upset every Tuesday night, which, at least at MSNBC, is what we talk about. So I'm going to put some of you on the spot and ask you to throw in some questions because I want to hear where you want to take this. Yes, sir.
Can you just wait for the microphone?
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
I'll come around this way. Yeah, if you could stand up and then state your name and where you're from, and then ask your question. Do you mind passing this over?
Hi, Larry Manzino, I'm retired now, formerly Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. Full disclosure, I'm a lifelong Democrat, so. But I'm reasonable, and I liked when you
Me too.
started, and you said that there was a bunch of political corruption that sort of made the Republican
Perception of political corruption.
Okay, stray, but that the base is really a lot of nice people, and that made me think. I'm very logical, right, scientist? So the next statement, though, was these people broke faith with the base, and that's why the base is backing this fellow, Trump. So my next conclusion is, the Republican base likes racist, misogynist, weird, whatever he's saying. I mean, that's my conclusion. Because they're all, as you said, they're all going, hearing what he says, and rushing out to vote. This isn't jive. I mean, it leaves me confused.
Well, I adore all the Democrats that worry about my party, so thank you for that. I think it's just what I said, that my sense in traveling from coast to coast is that no politician, nobody voting for Hillary Clinton is voting for her because they like the way Benghazi turned out. They're voting for her because the whole package is impressive to them and compelling to them. And I know it's hard when you're in the other party because a lot of us are our vision gets clouded by partisanship, but the Republican options are complicated too, and they're far more imperfect than the Democratic ones. I frankly think Bernie Sanders is the most honorable person running for the presidency in this cycle. I'd vote for him. But I mean, I'm not sure I heard a question in there, but I think the Trump voter.
No, I see you're avoiding it very nicely. You should run for office yourself. You basically laid out a platform for this person.
Yeah, I think it's confusing, so I'm going to agree with you on that and let you have the last word.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Ryan, not
Hi,
Rhina,
Ryan.
but I'm a senior.
I'm blind as a bat, so I
Yeah.
wouldn't have, I would
I'm
have
a senior
faked
and
it.
professor at Rutgers class, Media and Politics. I watch a lot of CNN, MSNBC, so I'm familiar with your commentary also. So my question is, I guess from a younger person's point of view also, but at what point are we going to stop watching and start actually publicly backing somebody and just take it, Like, oh, so you don't agree with me, and you don't, people are getting violently, there's the issue of violence now in publicly backing a candidate, whether it's Bernie Sanders. I guess that's a name you hear a lot, but what's your opinion on when do we stop watching and start, actually going and maybe going to a rally and just getting involved? Now. Okay.
Sorry, I told you my point of view.
Yeah. I mean, do you know who you? I mean,
I do support somebody, but no,
Okay.
I've not been to a rally yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you support someone and you feel safe, you should go and support them. I mean, I think, listen, paying attention and caring is like the threshold question, and you got my, love and affection and admiration for getting that far. But if you've got time and you're into it, I think going is a whole nother level of sort of understanding the movement. And I've been to, I've been to thousands of political events in my career, and they're totally different from what you see on the news. And the only way to arrive at sort of a well-rounded understanding of each party's supporters is to sort of go and see it for yourself and talk to people. And if you have, I'm sure you're studying all the time, you don't have a lot of free time, but what I would actually advise you to do is to go to events, on both sides, because that's how you really, I think, my ability to not judge anyone that disagrees with me is from having people very close in my family of totally different persuasions. And, the only people I can't talk to are people who don't care. So, I would go to support whoever you want to support, but if this is your thing, I would go and try to understand why people support what you abhor. And those are the people that end up as our leaders, and those are the people who lead the debates and lead our communities and make it better. Not the people who sort of get red-faced in it, no offense, sir, and exasperated at how someone could see something differently. So I would advise you to go see the people you support and go try and understand the people you don't. Another student? In the back?
Hi, my name's Charles.
Hey, Charles.
I'm not a card-carrying member of the Republican Party.
Safer that way.
Yeah. But since you are, I was just wondering, recently, like the Tea Party, different factions of the GOP, why don't they just split if there's so much infighting?
They will. I think they have. I think you've seen it already. Because I think whether Donald Trump is the nominee or not, whether he wins or not in November, his movement isn't going anywhere. And they've now been with him for 9 months. So the party is split. It's broken. I'm not positive that's a terrible thing. I mean, as I said, it had sort of broken faith on so many issues that in some ways it would have been difficult to piece it back together. But I think, I think Democrats went through this in the 60s and 70s, where part of the party on national security issues was just dead set against engagement and the military, and then part of the party, sort of believed in a strong defense. So, I mean, the parties have been through this before, and they do put themselves back together in an improved manner. The road to any sort of reconciliation on the Republican side, though, is many cycles away. And Lindsey Graham on Morning Joe today said, "I'm not even talking about the prospect of winning in 16. I don't think we will with Cruz or Trump. I'm talking about, like, for the rest of my lifetime, trying to salvage the Republican brand." And Lindsey Graham saying that he's not even sure that's possible was sort of stunning to me. And that Lindsey Graham's project has nothing to do with winning the next election. It has to do with trying to keep together the party that he loves. So I think they're really, it's a minority of people who are sort of speaking about it as frankly as he is. But I think, you're right. The Tea Party was the first manifestation of that break that I talked about. But it's been followed by something far more intense and angry, which has been this sort of populist movement, which disagrees with the Republican sort of orthodoxy on central issues of foreign policy, trade, healthcare, you name it. So it really does require a reassembly process. I think it could take a long time.
Any more student questions down here?
I've got one right here.
Yep.
You want to say your question? I'll repeat it. So we keep. Oh, there you go. She's there with the mic. Okay.
Hi. My name is DeAndre Smalls, and so I guess just from a journalist perspective, like I feel as though like this election so far has shown like allowed like myself to see the bad side of media, kind of like the ugly side of media, and a lot of people think that the candidates are manipulating the media, but I think that in a lot of instances, the media are like are the puppeteers in regards to how they manipulate the candidates, and they have a controlling factor over the candidates. And I think that I just realized that by like watching you speak and like or hearing you speak and like just staying up to date with news recently. So I just want to get your take on how you feel about that. Do you feel as though the media is are kind of the puppeteers in this whole thing, or do you think that the candidates themselves are manipulating the media?
I think this distrust of the media is fueling the rise of the outsiders on both sides, right? I mean, Sanders on the left and Trump on the right have the most direct communication with their base, and the media isn't as much of a factor as sort of more establishment candidacies. One, I think, of the biggest differences in this campaign is that the definition of a political journalist has changed, and a sort of citizen journalist with an iPhone can get a story out or a comment out from a rope line as quickly as a network reporter can. So I think if that's your worry, one of the things happening in this cycle is it's controlled by sort of the masses now. I mean, everybody is a journalist, if you will. Everybody with a camera can drive the news process. And so I actually think campaigns and media outlets have less control than ever before, and that should be reassuring if your distrust lies in that relationship. I think that's what you're saying by, the relationship between the media and the campaigns feels sort of opaque, maybe. Is that kind of where you're getting?
Definitely, and that's what we were talking about in class. Like, we ourselves as citizens have sort of an impact on the candidacy and the process as well. And like, I guess you're saying that our impact is bigger than I think it is.
I mean, I think in this cycle it's bigger than it's ever been, and I think the direction it's going isn't to return power to campaigns and networks. It's to almost eradicate power from the networks and the candidates. It's to sort of turn it over to anyone with an iPhone at a rally. So I think the future is brighter than whatever gives you anxiety about the present is my best way to answer that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Dylan, and this
Hi,
is sort of a
Don.
follow-up to the question asked earlier about sort of that divide happening in the Republican Party and if that party is going to sort of sever. But I guess this sort of my question is, how do you think the parties are sort of going to kind of form new coalitions out of that? Because I also see in the Democratic Party that there's sort of a similar split happening, and I think it has more to do with class than anything. I think there's sort of the perception of the elite class, and then you sort of have the lower class, and they're more kind of distrusting of the media, more distrusting of the politicians. And I guess my question is, in a few years, how do you think the Republican Party, what is their coalition going to look like, and what's the Democratic coalition going to look like, and how is that kind of going to change?
I actually think that you touched on the single greatest divide in this cycle. It's not right-left. It's haves, have-nots. And John Edwards actually was sharply criticized in 2004 for running a campaign about two Americas. It was viewed as divisive class warfare, which typically didn't work. But Sanders and Trump are speaking to the same voter. People who've been screwed by trade, people who hate the concept of money in politics. The super PAC is a new thing. There weren't super PACs when I did campaigns in '04. Money had to go through the campaigns and be declared for how it came from. That's not the case anymore. One rich person can write a huge check and fuel an entire candidate's run. So the dividing line in politics now is people for whom the current policies really embraced by Democrats and Republicans. And you can see this in all the pressure that Sanders was able to apply to Clinton on things like her trade vote, her past positions on foreign policy and whatnot. The divide now is within each party, and it's sort of the economic populism that is really the dominant sentiment in both parties. People for whom economic security is either a distant memory or not anything in their near future. So I think this is sort of the story of this cycle, that the new dividing line is not right-left. It is within each party between economically either disenfranchised people that used to have more economic security and used to have a job and haven't been able to get retrained or rehired in industries like manufacturing or giant employers who have left states like North Carolina or South Carolina or the Midwest, and people, a much smaller group for whom sort of the status quo was working. And that dynamic completely changed Hillary Clinton's candidacy, and she adapted. And frankly, Elizabeth Warren was talking about those things and decided not to run. But I think arguably Elizabeth Warren shaped the contours of the Democratic primary more than anybody else. And then on the Republican side, it is precisely that divide. And you see it every Tuesday night in the exit polls. People who are economically anxious vote almost like 90% for Trump. And people who are better off vote for the other guys. But altogether, the other guys, it takes like 4 other guys to equal the numbers Trump's getting. So yeah, that is the dominant divide in this cycle and the story of this cycle. And I think campaign operatives like to talk about autopsies, what we'll learn after we lose. And we never learn very much on my side. But this has been, voters have been screaming at the top of their lungs really since '08, when the bailouts came and sort of bailed out giant financial institutions. And I remember watching Occupy Wall Street and thinking, our voters get nothing out of Wall Street. Why are we defending the banks? And I'm not for the other extreme either. But I think my party made some mistakes in not listening to sort of the cries of economic really trepidation from a lot of people for whom the economy stopped working. And I think the Democratic, there wasn't a fight on the Democratic side. Hillary just moved over to the Warren Sanders positions, which are far more in line with where the Democratic base is. The Republicans are still sort of duking it out, and so far there are more people who adhere to Trump's economic messages so far. I wouldn't call them prescriptions yet, but messages.
And I guess just to that, do you think there's going to be, a shift on the Republican side that maybe because of this divide that some are going to move over there, or do you think it's going to happen the way around, whether it's split the Democrat with that's where are the coalitions of people, the have-nots, where are they going to shift over to in the next few years?
Oh, it's binary. They become Democrats or they change.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens to the Republicans.
We have another question up here.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Antonia. I'm in the Woman President burn. I'm kind of in a little bit of disagreement about what we talked about with the media being puppeteers of the election. I think that maybe, I want to know if you think that maybe it's kind of unintentional. Like back when there were so many candidates for the Republican nomination, and even when there were a few for the Democratic nomination, in regards to debates and stuff, sometimes the moderators would give a lot more time to maybe Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton because not that the media is trying to push the voters into a certain direction of voting for someone, but because the media knows who the people want to listen to. People want to hear, well, what's Donald Trump going to say? Why is he running for president? And people want to hear what Hillary Clinton has to say because everybody was like, oh, well, she's going to get the nomination. Let's just listen to her now. So I want to know if you think that maybe the media is unintentionally playing a role in who gets these nominations by working towards their agenda of just giving the audience what they want and, making the money that they need to make as media corporations.
Yeah, I mean, my point is I understand how you could arrive at that conclusion, and I don't think the media does enough to make you not feel that way. I work in the media. I mean, any sense that I mean, it is all unintended. I mean, they're objective, and I went to journalism school. I mean, I went to the Mandel School of Journalism at Northwestern. I studied journalism as an undergrad at Berkeley. No journalist comes into journalism with the goal of being a puppeteer. My point is I understand that you would arrive at that impression, and there are things that are happening in this cycle to go the other direction. But I work at a place that we're all trying our damnedest, working 22 hours a day just to cover this thing. And I work for both sides of the house. So I work for the news network, NBC, and then I work for a left-leaning cable network at MSNBC. And maybe it's because I'm on the right, but I think even at MSNBC, they just try to cover. I think individual hosts have individual preferences, but I think they just try to cover it. With an obvious bias against the Republicans in the same way Fox has an obvious bias against the Democrats. But I think the news organizations, CNN, the three networks, it is unintentional. That's my belief. And to the degree that Trump gets on the air, it's because he's been the Republican frontrunner, the person most likely to be the Republican nominee with a chance of being the next president of the United States. That's the reason he's on TV so often. And he has been the frontrunner since last July. So if he's on TV and he's in first place, it isn't the network's fault. It's the 16, bozos who ran against him and couldn't figure out how to beat him. I mean, what are you supposed to do? Ignore him? So, and I'm not saying they're bozos as people. I'm just saying they lost. He won. There are two guys left in the race, and they're getting a lot of airtime now too. But when there were 17 in the race, people paid more attention to the people with the most chance, and they all got airtime. I mean, it's important to note that there were two debates on the Republican side, I think until the end of the year, right? So that everybody running got 2 hours of national television time to stand shoulder to shoulder with their opponents. But, once people started voting, they were voting for who they were voting for. And I think there is obviously, although with Trump, I'm not sure there's a benefit to media coverage. I mean, he says the craziest things. So I'm not even sure seeing him is helping him, I mean, I don't know anymore. So this whole relationship, between frontrunners and the correlation to the time they get is always hotly debated. But I think there is, on the media side, a sense that there's an obligation to cover the people on top and to make them answer for the things they've said, particularly if it's Donald Trump, who, there were sometimes 2 debates in a week, but between debates, he'd said 11 incendiary things. So there were often a lot of things to go at Trump with. But I know that other people that ran, and again, I just, jokingly say, bozos people talk about an anti-Trump movement. There were 16 anti-Trump campaigns. They were his opponents. And 14 of them have failed. 2 are still standing, and they're both behind him. So, I can't explain all that to you, but that does give the networks a bit of a rationale for covering him. He has been in the lead since July. And if they'd been ignoring him and he were in this position, imagine the outrage. I'm going to let Danielle pick. I got in trouble.
Hi, Jesse Adams. I'm an undergraduate associate at the Eagleton Institute. I'm curious what your take on the difference between the sexism that a Democratic candidate like Hillary Clinton experiences compared to the sexism a Republican candidate like Sarah Palin experiences. Do you see them being very similar, or do you see differences?
You know, in 2008, I thought they were in terms of the media treatment of each campaign, I thought there were a lot of parallels. I mean, the two women couldn't be more different, but I thought that this sort of class of questions, and we talked about in the last hour, the class of questions about their role as mothers and wives were reserved for women. I thought the focus on their appearance and their clothes and their hair was reserved for both those women. I think where their coverage really took two wildly different tracks was there was a legitimate line of questioning about Sarah Palin's qualifications that does not exist on the other side. And there is I don't want to, you know, I always get in trouble when I call it legitimate, but there are legitimate things in the news to ask Hillary Clinton about pertaining to her record, and there were with Palin, but she was sort of newer to the scene. So there were different kinds of questions that were above board, but I think they got mixed in with the kinds of questions that were specific to their gender. So I think in 2008, and Anne Kornbluth, I don't know, did you guys read this? Notes from the Cracked Glass Ceiling? Anne Kornbluth's book was just, and she talked to you guys, right? I mean, she wrote a great book about 2008 and sort of how each woman was treated unfairly, but sort of within their own lane and in different ways. But yeah, I absolutely saw that. And one, I lived, I told the story in the last hour about walking into ABC News when David Weston was president. It was maybe 10 days before the election. We had a good sense that we were not going to prevail, but he said, well, what can we do better? And we were like, 10 days left. But we said, you know, there has been during the time of the campaign, a sensitivity to race that is to be lauded. And McCain was part of that, and Obama was too. Obama gave I think, one of the best speeches of his career about race. McCain stood up to people in his own crowds who made comments about Obama's nationality or sort of crazy how far we've descended and that now the head of the birther movement is our frontrunner, but that's a personal problem. But I said to him, and I told you this story last hour, but I said to him, people stand up at Palin rallies with signs that say whore and see you next Tuesday. And nobody in the media does anything. And so while I'm happy that we are policing the debate on race, I'm sad and disgusted that you can still call a woman running for the vice president of the United States a whore and it doesn't make the evening news. So, you know, we have a long way to go, and I don't think the Clinton campaign will complain about it, but I don't think there are signs that we've totally addressed all the deficiencies in how men and women are covered. Whew, it's a lot to answer after that.
Hi, my name's Sky, and I'm a sophomore at Rutgers. And my question has to do with, so when you've been talking about the media, and since you work for media corporations, so that's like traditional media. So I'm kind of wondering how you view social media in all of this, and whether it's now just a normal extension of traditional media, or if it serves a different and newer purpose, especially like considering this political discussion that we're having.
You know, I wasn't good at a lot of things in politics, and Mike Duhane can verify that, but I was good at knowing what I didn't know. And when it comes to social media, I know that I don't totally know and appreciate its power. I know its effect on journalism is, you know, monumental. I know that there is an incredible equalizing effect of someone sending out a tweet and an anchor, you know, standing in front of a rally and doing a live report. They have the same effect on a campaign now. One is not greater than the other. The anchor no longer has more power than the individual on Twitter. But I can't tell you, I can't explain to you how Donald Trump used Twitter to be in first place and stay there. I can't tell you whether I think that's a good thing or not, because I'm not sure. I think it's a good thing on the journalism side, where the person with an iPhone has as much power to get the campaigns to respond to something. But I'm not sure on the campaign side whether I think it's a good thing or not yet. You'll have to tell me at the end of the cycle. I'll get my email from Ruth.
Hi, I'm Alexandra. I'm a junior in Professor Aronstock's class. So my question, you had mentioned that it disgusted you that a woman running for the vice president of the free world can be called names at a rally and it not make the evening news. So my question to you, being as someone who is a Republican and also a woman, I guess kind of the lines get blurred as what people go into the voting booths associating with nowadays. You know, do you associate as a feminist, or do you associate as a Republican or a Democrat or a person of color or a white person? And it kind of doesn't become more, it's not about the party anymore. There's other factors. So you being a woman and this kind of behavior disgusting you, how do you kind of differentiate those two, and especially as it pertains to Donald Trump and his relationship with women, especially as we've seen in the news with Megyn Kelly. Now, he is the Republican frontrunner, but this kind of treatment of women also disgusts you. How do you kind of go about that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm one voter, right? So I'll make my own calculation in the fall. I think that, again, for his supporters, it's like one piece of a very complicated picture. I've been on the receiving ends of his, I have a personal experience, so I can't claim any objectivity. I think it is one of the more troubling aspects of his candidacy. I think the racial undertones are probably the most troubling aspect of his candidacy. The other one, that ties for first or last, depending on how you look at it, is sort of the things he is willing to say about, they're mostly female critics that he goes after. S.E. Cupp at CNN is a frequent target of his attacks. Ana Navarro, also at CNN, is a frequent target of his attacks. When I was at The View, I wasn't on Twitter, so I didn't know about it, but he attacked me all the time. And it is the piece that just as a voter and as not even just as a woman, just as a voter, I mean, I said last hour, the President of the United States will have to go meet with, Angela Merkel, and if he's pissed at her, a big fat stupid cow, I mean, that makes me nervous. It speaks to his sort of temperament, and it makes me anxious. In terms of how women identify as voters, that is up to women, and the power is that they decide. And sort of the true progress of feminism is that you decide how you go into the voting booth. You go in as a Republican? Do you go in as a military voter? Do you go in as a small business owner? And you get to decide what ranks. If you go in as a small business owner, maybe you overlook the stuff you hate, and you think like, oh, he's gonna, help the economy. If you go in as, someone who just can't imagine your daughter's growing up in a world where someone calls Megyn Kelly crazy, you go in and vote. I mean, that's sort of the progress of feminism, is that no one tells you how to go in the voting booth and prioritize the power of your vote. You go in and vote however you damn well please. And the only person you have to please with the way you vote is yourself. And you don't have to tell anybody, and I advise you not to tell anybody at HBO who makes a movie about the campaign, because then you have to live with everybody knowing how you voted. But I mean, I think the very nature of the fact that we've made progress as women, and Hillary, I don't want to say that she personally but her campaign got ensnared in this a little bit. When they sort of accepted the narrative that they were struggling among millennial women. They were just struggling, full stop. And I went on the Today Show, they said, oh, she's struggling with millennial women. I said, she's struggling with millennial men too. I mean, she's struggling, period. And now she's not. And she's doing a little better among, when people stumble, they usually stumble among all groups. And I think there's a bit of a gender play when you just focus on one group where they're struggling. Do you know what I'm saying? So, I think our power as voters lies in the fact that we don't vote as a block. But I think that the way we vote does affect the outcome of elections. Sorry, guys. We are the deciders. And the Republicans who have won, people like Mike Duhame, helped George W. Bush win re-election in 2004 because he shrunk the gap between married women. And when Republicans win nationally, it's because they shrink the gender gap. Republicans never win the gender gap outright because there are a lot of young women and unmarried women who are just not available to Republicans. They vote, they're either single issue on reproductive rights, or they're just not available to the Republican Party. But when the Republican Party does well, it's almost always because they narrow the gap among married women. We called them security moms in 2004. I think they were called soccer moms in the 90s. Someone may have tried to call them NASCAR moms in '08, I don't know. But, you know, the way they vote is important, but how you vote is sort of up to you, and that's a good thing. Where's Tanya?
Hi, sorry, I came in a little late, so let me know if you answered this already, and I'll shut up and pass it off to somebody else. So, as a Republican who holds like similar views in the vein as you, pretty much, just from watching you on TV and stuff, I was wondering what your perspective is on what legacy a potential Trump nomination would leave on the party, and basically how did we get here? Like, to what extent is the Trump candidacy a problem we created for ourselves? Because I know your MSNBC colleague, Steve Schmidt, who's appeared here before, has basically spoken about that at length, and sort of, I was wondering what your perspective was.
Well, I'm trying to think of what Steve has said and how Steve and I usually agree on most. Yeah. Before this, okay. I was on with him Tuesday night, so I think I know where his head is now. But you can blame Trump, and you should, for everything he says and does on the campaign trail. You cannot blame Trump for the fact that he's the only one listening to people's economic anxiety. So to the degree that the Republican is snapped out of its coma in terms of thinking that talking about free trade and talking about tax cuts and talking about rolling back Obamacare are good things for and defending Wall Street are good things for our voters, it is a very good thing. No one can win the nomination anymore being pro-free trade, pro-tax cuts for high earners, only, exclusively, and against some sort of access to health care. I won't say the mandate, because that sharply divides the Republican Party. But I think it's probably a good thing that the Republican Party has had to get in touch with the profound, intractable despair of economic insecurity in this country. And if we never win again, it will be because we learned the wrong lessons from the rise of Trump. It would be because we were blinded by his fights with Megyn Kelly. And the funny thing about politics, and Ruth and I had this conversation before all of these talks, your karma comes around in a dog year. You know, in a normal person's life, your karma can take, you know, from your young days, when you break up with someone on a Post-it, to the end of your life when your wife leaves you for her trainer. You know, I mean, it can take a long time for karma to play out. In politics, your karma can play out in the course of a primary. So the Republican Party, voters are the most forgiving body of people on the planet. And the voters are dying for their politicians to improve and evolve. So the Republicans can still save themselves. I mean, what's amazing to me is that, to me, the way that to beat Trump would have been to take his economic message and do it, you know, with some elegance and high-mindedness without all the personal insults, and that none of them did, isn't Trump's fault. So I think, you know, this could still happen. This could happen before the convention. This could be sort of the foundation for a contested convention. One of the guys still running, or somebody else that comes down from Mars or Venus, or girls could come in, connect with our voters on an emotional level, the way Trump has, maybe rehabilitate one of the guys that ran against him and lost early on. I don't know. I mean, anything can happen in politics, and this is such a head scratcher that they can, you know, they can try to put this back together in any way they want. And I'm not as positive as Lindsay is that all is lost. It might be, and I think you'll start hearing sort of those sort of dire predictions more and more. But I think the more likely scenario is that a new crop of leaders sort of comes up in the post-Trump era. Here's the other thing. Trump isn't, you know, like a fashion trend. I mean, he isn't going to the back of the closet. You know, win, lose, or whatever. He and his supporters are not going anywhere. And the next president will give a State of the Union, and there will be the Republican response and the Trump response. I mean, he is now part of the political, he is now structurally part of the conversation. So I don't know that everyone has sort of come to terms with the new normal, but to the degree that he affects the party's message on economic issues, I think that could be productive and a good thing. To the degree that people like Ted Cruz follow him down the path on some of the things he said about Muslims, I think that's an incredibly destructive thing, but everybody does. I don't think it's likely that that happens. I think it's more likely that smart people try to learn the better lessons about the economic message.
We have a question up here.
Hi, my name is Apurva. Bear with me, I'm kind of nervous to be in the presence of a TV star. But
I'm pal 3 rows up felt that way. Just kidding. I don't mean to pick on you, sir.
I'm a lifelong student, but I
Yeah.
also work in healthcare. So as we've been talking about today, and it seems to be a popular discussion, we have to reconcile a lot of things. And as someone that also works in healthcare, one of which is, potentially voting for candidates and supporting candidates that advocate the use of torture, which is so abhorrent to our profession. So since one of the titles or the themes in this title is messages, I was wondering how many people can you still reach, are yet to reach? Because when we talk about reaching people in healthcare and health behaviors, we talk about people that we can affect change in, those that have already made up their mind, those that will change their mind. So what percentage of voters do you think are going to change their mind, and what percentage of voters are already decided on their candidates?
It's a really good question. It's the question that the smartest people in politics are trying to figure out right now. When primaries end, it's usually viewed as one phase of the campaign, and both sides are usually viewed to have been speaking to their primary voters. They call them the base. And then they turn to a broader audience, the general election audience. My impression is that this has been such a nationalized election. Usually the primaries play out with some state-specific issues. In Miami, you get asked different questions than you get asked in Ohio, and you see different results in different places. This has been such a nationalized conversation that I think there are people that haven't, there are lots of people who haven't participated in the primaries that will participate in the general election, but I'm just not sure how many people are undecided. And I said on Monday morning that I had talked to a lot of consultants about that voter, maybe the mom vote, we call them the security moms in a four, but maybe a suburban mom who is not driven by social issues. If you care about, if you're a social conservative, you're probably never gonna be available to Hillary Clinton because she's socially very liberal and has been her whole career. It's one of her credentials to her liberal base. But if you are not, if you are a pro-choice woman who cares about national security, you have to acknowledge that kind of voter might be available to a Hillary Clinton candidacy if the choice on the Republican side is Trump or Cruz. And that was the reality that Senator Lindsey Graham was speaking about this morning, that those two are so, they have such a hard time growing or expanding the kind of voters that are available to Republicans. You asked specifically about torture. Are you saying because people have such strong opinions about it that you rule out voters for one? What was your...
No, I'm saying that do you mind waiting? Sorry for the microphone, so we can get you on camera.
No, I'm just saying that I have colleagues currently that will say that they will vote for candidates that on record advocate the use of torture, despite the fact that ethically in our profession, it's so wrong. So they've already decided they're not going to change their mind.
Right, so you were asking more about undecided voters. Yeah, I mean, I think that in this kind of election, with saturation coverage that we talked about, I think there are probably fewer than usual, but there is always a big leap in the number of people that participate in a general election as there are people that participate in primaries. Now, and that's in part because every state is different, but in a lot of states you have to be registered as a Democrat or a Republican to even vote. And a lot of people, I think in the last 8 years, the largest growth in a voting group is to independent, or some states call it California calls it do not declare or do not state. But so independents are a growing constituency of voters, and they can't participate in every state's primaries. So I don't know if they're undecided, but their voices haven't been heard from yet. What do you think? Do you think there are a lot of undecided people? I mean,
I think it depends on open and closed elections, right? Depending on the states and who has open elections and who has closed elections, you see a lot of difference in who gets the win, basically. I don't know if you've seen that or you think that's true.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, one of the arguments Ted Cruz is making is that he does well in closed primaries, which is a strange argument to be making when you want to be the guy that they take the nomination away from the other guy to give it to if you can only win in contests where only Republicans vote. You know what I mean? So I think yes, closed primaries mean that you're stronger within your party. I'm not as aware of which primaries are closed for Democrats. I would guess maybe Bernie does better in some of the closed primaries, but I'm not sure. He does better in open because he's drawing in some of these Reagan Democrats, if you will, and independents. But in a general election, you can usually show up and vote for whoever you want. So I think that corrects itself by a general.
I'm Josh Hurwitz. I actually taught here at Rutgers last semester, and I teach at the county college. What I noticed, and I don't know if you agree, there were just too many Republican candidates that if you thin that field earlier, like Scott Walker said, let's say Kasich, for example, just didn't campaign in Virginia, and Rubio had won it, it would have been a whole different Super Tuesday, or Ben Carson not running and Cruz winning, or if Rubio had done nothing or told his people in Vermont. And if Rubio would even dropped out a week or two earlier, Cruz would have won Missouri and possibly North Carolina. The whole media narrative would have been different. Was it just ego, or they're delusional? Why do these guys, they go on and on and on week after week after week?
So the worst thing that can happen to me at a wedding is a dessert buffet, because I'm like overwhelmed. I'm like brownies, and I'm like, I can't hear anything anyone's saying to me, and my 4-year-old could run into the street and I wouldn't notice because I'm like, dessert buffet, And the Republican primary was sort of like a dessert buffet. I mean, like I am a huge Chris Christie fan, and I think for the mood of the Republican primary, just stay with me, for the mood of the Republican electorate, he to me was an obvious, if the Republican electorate was looking for someone in that vein, he was to me an obvious person to be in the top tier, and he never was. But if you look at where the Republican primary voters were, there were too many choices. Jeb Bush is a guy who was branded by Donald Trump as low energy, didn't win anything, and was this, Who? So then you go to Christie. My point was there were too many choices for too few voters. There were not, the vast majority of voters who were interested in a person with experience was smaller than the number of voters who was interested in a person with none. And so for a smaller portion of participants in the Republican primary, there were too many choices. I liked the choices. I mean, I was at a dessert buffet, but I was a smaller part of the vote, and I was aware of that. What's interesting to me is that after New Hampshire, everybody smart said the only way to stop Trump is to turn it into a two-man race. Well, it's still not a two-man race. So what do you think's going to happen? I mean, I agree with your analysis, but it never became a two-man race, and that's why none of them succeeded. So tell me who you guys think wins the Republican primary in New Jersey. Raise your hand if you think Trump wins the Republican primary in New Jersey. Raise your hand if you think Kasich wins the Republican primary in New Jersey. Raise your hand if you think Cruz wins the Republican primary in New Jersey. Okay, hang on, keep going. Raise your hand if you think Trump wins the Republican primary in New York. Raise your hand if you think Kasich wins the Republican primary in New York. Raise your hand if you think Cruz wins the Republican primary in New York. Two more. Rhode Island. Raise your hand if you think Trump wins the Republican primary in Rhode Island. Raise your hand if you think Kasich wins the Republican primary in Rhode Island. Raise your hand if you think Cruz wins any more Republican primaries. I'll tell you what we have left. I'll tell you what we have left. Hang on. I'll tell you what we have left. We have Connecticut, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, California, Oregon, Washington State, New York, New Jersey. How many people think Cruz, Maryland and Delaware? How many people think Cruz wins one or more of those states? Which one? No, the ones I named, the Northeast and. How many people think Kasich wins any of the states that I named? How many people think Trump wins the majority of the states I named? See, they don't need to pay me anything at MSNBC. You guys know. Okay, I think we have time for a couple more, right, Ruth?
Yeah, and I told Danielle that we can
Okay. So over
Hi,
here.
I'm Jennifer Altman. I was an Eagleton student like 20 years ago, and now I'm a professor at a local community college. I'm trying to understand the Trump appeal, and I want to trust your view that a lot of it's in spite of all the rhetoric around race and ethnicity and gender. And I also have friends that are in support of Trump as well, and I'm trying to understand that in spite, because I don't see them as racist and sexist and so forth. And so what I'm trying to get at is, if you take away those things, what is the appeal of Trump? And I know there's the tough guy stuff, and that was what Christie was appealing, and I know there's the money out of politics in the sense that he has his own money, but I want to get to what you said, is that if the Republican Party has lost some of its base because they're hurting economically, what do they think that Trump would do for them that is not tied to immigrant issues and racism and sort of that scapegoating, because the Mexican immigrants aren't taking their jobs. I understand the trade issue, so I guess maybe as you're going to say trade, trickle down has not proven itself. Maybe it's taxes around small businesses. But the other things that Trump's, well, he hasn't said anything, so I don't know really what his policies are to help the lower and middle class. But I'm assuming that what they are, one more thing, is that they might be things that are really democratic policies. So I guess what I'm saying to you is, what... What do you think Bernie's appeal is? Why do people want Bernie? I think, well, Bernie, I think it's the Wall Street, it's anti-elitism, right?
3 things that people like about Bernie.
His stating that redistribution of wealth, I'll say it, redistribution of wealth. Taxing the rich, which is really the same thing.
I don't have a super bag. I don't even have a backpack.
Yeah.
I think your mic went out.
Sanders are incorruptible. He doesn't have any donor money. This is the Sanders appeal. Because the only way for me to explain. It's a revolution. Okay, perfect. So the 3 reasons people are voting for Bernie Sanders. And these are the ways that he's changed Hillary for the better. He talks about how the money in politics is a corrupting influence. Okay, and the Saturday Night Live thing is to me at this point in the cycle, Saturday Night Live blurs with the candidates, but it does for everybody else too. He doesn't have a super PAC, doesn't even have a backpack. 2, just calling total BS on trickle-down economics, that the economy isn't working for you because trade is terrible for you. Second part of Bernie's message. And the 3rd is a revolution. We're not going to do any small ball. You're not going to have to wait till 4 years after my presidency is ended to feel any benefits. It's a revolution. If you're a Democrat, I know this is really hard, so I'm going to say it 3 times. Those are the same things people like about Trump. Those are the same things people like about Trump. Those are the same things people like about Trump. Period. Bernie's their second choice. Bernie's their second choice. Believe me, a lot of Trump supporters would take Bernie as a second choice. They are not ideological. The reason that Trump doesn't talk about abortion, the reason Trump says I'm fine with Planned Parenthood is because his supporters don't give a hoot about abortion. You know, they don't. His supporters are not motivated by interventionist foreign policy. And if any members of the Republican base were motivated by interventionist foreign policy, we'd still be talking about Rubio maybe winning New Jersey. These same things people like about Bernie Sanders, people on my side like about Trump. And I know it's in a package that may offend a lot of people, but that is what they like. And Trump makes it confusing because of all the other stuff, but at his core, what they like is that he is not being puppeted by anybody. He is not particularly ideological and care about social issues. And he promises a revolution. It'll change immediately. And that's what Republicans are responding to.